of the mini Drash here today with Shamash Brian. Let's give him some encouragement.
Thank you, Rabbi Ben. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Before I begin, I just wanted to express my emotion. It was it was an awesome worship this morning, and I'm actually looking forward to more. I'm usually up here and I play. I'm not singing as much anymore because we got a big group, and I love seeing them sing. So I just step back a little bit and they sound like angels when they sing. But today, just being like a congregant and being worshipped. I mean, connecting the worship. I'm usually up here, and it's not an easy task being a worship leader. But when as a congregant, and I haven't felt that in a long time, and I wanted to say, Greg, thank you. That was an awesome worship. Thank you very much. So I'll be talking about Tu B'Shavat. Tu B'Shavat is a holiday that is a holiday in Judaism. We as Messianics, we observe it as well. Tu B'Shavat is actually tomorrow night. It begins tomorrow night into Monday. Tu B'Shavat literally means the 15th of Shabbat, which is the month of Shabbat. You may also hear it as Rosh Hashanah La Ilanot. Ilan being tree, Ilanot being trees. It's the New Year of the trees. On this day, believe it or not, it's a holiday. It's a new year. For all the people that are new to Messianic Judaism and Judaism, it's a new year. Yes, you heard right. It's a new year. And surprisingly enough, in Judaism, we have 4 New Years throughout the year. For more information, if you have somebody you wanna pick their brain about, Reb Emmanuel can sure help you out. Rabbi Andy, Rabbi Ben, they can all help you out in terms of the holidays. But going back to Tu B'Shavat, on this day is the day that we celebrate nature. We celebrate agriculture. Fruits. How many of you guys like fruits in here? Oh, that's it? Oh my God. So, it's we celebrate the agriculture, nature, fruits. Why? Well, we rely on the earth for fruit that it produces. It is our source for food. The trees also provide oxygen. It brings us some of the tastiest fruits as well. When I was writing this, I couldn't help but remember back just a quick little story. My wife and I, she's from Brazil, and she grew up in the farm. So my first time going to Brazil was not to the beach, it was to the farm. So I wish it could have been the other way around, but we ended up going to a farm, and it was my first experience in a farm. Growing up in Jersey in a big metropolitan area, you don't get to see the farms, too many farms and animals and trees where you can just go and pick like an apple or a mango. Mangoes, that's one of my favorite fruits, by the way. Just like being out in the nature, just like completely disconnecting from like a big city, metropolitan city like New York City, and then flying 11 hours to Brazil and driving 3 hours to like the farm where she grew up, to just be in absolute like silence. And believe it or not, I disconnected from the digital technological world that we live in, and I went into nature. And that day was very beautiful, and that day really, really, really marked my life, because I ate mangoes, I ate apples right from the tree. For lunch, we for a lot of Spanish people, like that, I know you guys know this. It's yuca, which is cassava. It's like sort of like a potato in a way. but I've never seen it. It's a root, and you pick it up from the earth, from the ground. And we cleaned it up right then and there. We shaved it. We shaved the skin off. They cut it up in half. They had like a little pot. They put sticks and fires and all that, and they cooked it right there. It was nature. I've never experienced that before in my life, and imagine that 2,000 years ago. No technology, no earphones, no music, no nothing. I felt really, really connected to nature, and you know what? I felt close to God. I'm like, wow, this is something I've never experienced, and it's wonderful and it's beautiful. So as I was typing this up, I was reading, I was reminding, I thought of this great moment in my life where I picked bananas, I picked mangoes. Bananas are actually really heavy to pick up. I'm like, I picked it up, I'm like, hey honey, take a picture of me, and then I cut it with like the big knife, and boom. And it was like 100 pounds at least. But hey, it was awesome. It really was. So back to Tu B'Shavat. We love fruits in our household. Everybody loves fruits. We love it so much. My son Isaac, his favorite fruit, all he can eat is fruit salad. He can eat fruits all day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I wish he could have eaten vegetables as well. I'm having a hard time with vegetables. But speaking of vegetables, I was a vegetarian as well for 8 years before I gave it up. Most vegetarians have a strong argument for doing it. Everything from stopping animal cruelty to the fear of eating flesh, or to like my purpose where I did it too. It was a religious purpose. I fasted. I lost weight and I looked younger. I didn't do it. I really liked it, but I didn't do it because of that. I did it because, you know what? I really want to draw closer to God, and I read about fasting in the Bible. I'm like, you know what? Let me try it out. And the man doesn't live by bread alone, and by like steak and chicken and all that. I cut it all out, and I was more focused. I was more determined. I served more. I did more things. I felt closer to God, and I challenge you, if you're going through a rough time, try fasting. I mean, you're never going to go wrong, and you're going to see where God takes you and how He blesses you in the journey. So my diet was mainly fruits and vegetables. When a tree is expired, when a tree can no longer stand, and we cut it down, we benefit from many useful items, such as paper, wood for construction and do-it-yourself projects, and cellulose, which is found in the trees, which is used to make gum, lipstick, sponges, tires, etc. One of the things that I'd like to point out is these things right here on the Torah scroll. This part of the Torah scroll is called the Eitz Chaim. So when you pick it up, you're like, hey, pick it up from the rollers here. They have a name. It's called the Eitz Chaim, which means the tree of life. So when we stand and when we put her back into the ark, and Rabbi Andy stands and sings, that's on top of the page, and I forget the name of the page, the Eitz Chaim, and we read it in English. This is the Eitz Chaim. Tu B'Shavat is celebrated with a seder made up of fruits, hard shell and soft inside, fruits like walnuts and almonds. We have soft fruits with a pit, like olives, dates, peaches, apricots. We have soft fruits that are all around, like grapes, figs, and raisins. And finally, we have fruits that have tough skin on the outside, but it's very sweet fruit on the inside, like my favorite, mangoes and bananas. The list goes on, and whatever fruit is your favorite, God has made it with pleasure for you to enjoy. So what is our part? What is our part in Tu B'Shavat? Yes, we play an important part in this awesome cycle. It's not just so your local farmer or your environmentalist that does all the work. We share the responsibility. We connect with the earth. We connect with agriculture. We connect with the trees. Everything from recycling to planting new trees. Actually, we plant new trees in this season. You know, this Tu B'Shavat starts the beginning of the spring. At least in Israel, it marks the beginning of the spring. It is our duty as Messianics to inspire the world through what Messiah has taught us, to bear good fruit, showing ourselves to everyone that we are his Talmidim, that we are his disciples. Written in John 15, verse 8. Let our good works reflect our Messiah Yeshua.
Amen.
For my closing, I'd like to recite Proverbs, Mishlei, Proverbs 3, verse 18. She is a tree of life to those who embrace her, and blessed will be all who firmly hold to her. As we rejoice in Shabbat and anticipate Tu B'Shavat with pleasure, let us be grateful for reaching this new season. Let's be like the trees planted on God's green earth. Let us bear good fruits of the Ruach, like in Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. But the fruit of the Ruach, the Spirit, is love, is peace, is patience, is kindness, is goodness, is faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.
Shamash Brian. Shabbat Shalom again, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
I really enjoyed Shamash Brian's mini Drash about Tu B'Shavat. Never too old to learn something new. There's an old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you can always teach an older human new tricks, new things. We're always learning. Today I'm going to talk about Exodus 15, the Song of the Sea. You know that it's the first song on record anywhere, as far as we know. Dated over 3,000 years ago. The Song at the Sea. Some people call it often enough the Song of Moses, and while it is a Song of Moses, it is not the Song of Moses. The Song of Moses is actually in Deuteronomy. And there it's echoed and additions made in the book of Revelation. It's called the Song of Moses and the Lamb. But this is the Song of the Sea, or the Song at the Sea. It's very different. You see, the Song of Moses is actually a warning to Israel in Deuteronomy. You mess up, you get away from God's word, there's trouble ahead. Don't get surprised. This is what's going to happen, right? This psalm. The Song at the Sea is a song of victory. And it's a song of deliverance, of celebration, of praise. Moses leads and all Israel echoes. A little while ago, when Greg Silverman was doing his first worship set here, set 2 is coming later, he was doing set 1, and there was some of the songs that he would say, we participate. He sings a line and then we echo it. And this is what was going on. Moses would lead and they would respond. And even in the Torah script, when you see the Hebrew in the Torah, you'll see that Exodus 15, the Song at the Sea, is differently constructed the way it's laid out than the rest of the Torah. It's very different. It looks like it's a responsive text. One says this, the other one says that. It's back and forth. Ever since this Song at the Sea, singing has been a way of praising God. But the Song at the Sea was the first. There are sentimental songs today which catch our attention, right? You just put a little hook in the song with Ayo, Ayo or something and everybody loves it. They had a song years ago, it only had, I think, one word, baby, 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 and everybody was singing. Wow, how difficult was it to remember the lyrics of that song? Baby, baby, baby. And they catch your attention, but none of these songs are so endearing as our love for God, our love for Adonai, our love for Abba Father in heaven. It's deep. It's part of who we are. Because each person, by nature of their humanity, their existence, simply that you're breathing means you have a divine spark within you. A little piece of God inside of you. We tap our toes sometimes and move our bodies to some of the beats today. But they are worldly and seldom as spiritual as the dance we'll do in heaven. My attention is drawn to the Star-Spangled Banner. Some of you know it well. Others may not know it well. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? It's a beautiful song about victory, about triumph, about freedom. And yes, it is a song of the world, but it's a song of triumph. And the writers of this song and the singers of it at first believed it to be a victory over evil, over oppression. It used to be shortly after 9/11 that people would sing that song out loud at ball games and public events, but they don't do that too much anymore. And even at Little League ball games, they play the song, but nobody sings it. Why don't people sing this patriotic song as much as they did after 9/11? I can think of a couple of reasons that I'd like to share with you. First of all, people don't have a sense of passion that they once had. Right after 9/11, our nation was shaken and outraged by the atrocity committed against America. The tragedy at the World Trade Center, the tragedy in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon, the crashed plane in Pennsylvania. People's anger translated into a patriotism that was in all-time high for many months. The second reason people don't sing the Star-Spangled Banner as much as they used to is at public gatherings, there's generally no one to lead them. It's almost like no one really wants them to sing. Now, if you get a professional baseball or football game, usually they have some singer. I guess they hire them. I don't know. They come out there, some star, and they get out there, somebody top-notch, and then they sing. But many a time, they just play the song. like at Little League games and other games. They just play it, and nobody sings along. It's like, when is this going to be over so we can get to the game? It almost seems like no one really wants them to sing anyway. So people don't sing the song because they're afraid they may end up singing it alone, all by themselves. And nobody wants to stand up, put their hand on their heart and go, "Oh, say, can you see?" And everybody else going, "Look at that jerk." Right? You don't want to be singled out. Now, everybody stood up. That would be great. But you don't want to be the lone man out. In Exodus 15, the nation of Israel sings a powerful song of praise to God. And they sing with all their hearts, all the fiber of their being. They're singing and dancing and praising God because they have the passion of the moment. Egypt had enslaved Israel for over 400 years. But God, Adonai, had led them out of slavery with his powerful right hand. In fact, when the Egyptians had pursued them, God had opened the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, to let Israel pass through, and then buried the Egyptian army in the waters as they pursued them. And not only do they feel the passion, but there are a couple of people to lead them in their singing. It's true. The people didn't walk through and all of a sudden song broke out. There were people leading them in that song. First, there's Moses. Exodus 15 verse 1 says, "Then Moses and all the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to Adonai, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." And this song goes on for 19 verses. A lot more than would be required for baby, baby, baby. 19 verses, that's a long song. And then Miriam picks up a tambourine and leads the women in song as they repeat the first verse of Moses' song. "Sing to Adonai, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he is hurled into the sea." That's verse 21. Miriam was one of the people who led them in singing. I'm going to be talking a lot about her. Remember that Miriam was Moses' big sister. Remember that. Sometimes we think of Moses and all like Aaron and Miriam off to the side. She was older than him. Much. We're first introduced to Miriam when she's just a young girl in Exodus chapter 2. Moses' parents are faced with a crisis. The Pharaoh has decreed that every Hebrew baby boy was to be thrown into the Nile to be drowned. For 3 months, they hid their baby, but eventually it becomes obvious that they will ultimately be fruitless in hiding him. So they devise this plan. And they build a basket, they coat it with pitch, they put the baby inside, they put the basket with the baby in the reeds along the shore to be found. Exodus 2 verse 4 tells us Moses' sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. That's a really interesting verse for me. If you think about it, if you ponder it, if you break through the verse. You know, she might have been there because her mother asked her to do it. Or she might have decided on her own. We're not told. But one thing becomes apparent. She's a very smart girl. We're told that when Pharaoh's daughter opens the basket, realizes it's a Hebrew child, she feels sorry for the baby. At this point, Miriam comes up and asks Pharaoh's daughter, quote, Exodus 2 verse 7, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" Notice, and we read the story and it comes like a staple because we all know it. Everybody's seen The Prince of Egypt, right? Or The Ten Commandments by Cecil B. DeMille with Charlton Heston and all those guys. But I noticed something. She didn't ask Pharaoh's daughter if she wanted to keep the baby. Did you notice that? Yeah. Why does that always escape us? She never asks Pharaoh's daughter, if she wants to keep the baby. She didn't ask if Pharaoh's daughter even loved the child or wanted the child. She simply presumed this Egyptian would both love her baby brother and keep him as her own because she treated the decision as if it were already a decided fact. It's already decided. It's already a fact. It's already going to happen. So she doesn't ask if you want to keep him. She doesn't ask if you like him, if you want him, if you love him. Nope. You know, when I was a young man in my 20s, after my military service, I worked in sales for a time. And one of the things they taught me was, when making a sale, never ask if the client wants to buy the product. Don't ask. Instead, to close the sale, give them choices. You ask if they'd like the product in pink or blue. If you'd like it in medium size or extra large. If you would prefer the 5-year contract or the 10-year contract. You give the client a choice, and once they've begun to make these choices, you've already made the sale. That's what Miriam did with Pharaoh's daughter. She was a very smart girl, but she was also a very spiritual girl. She asks about a choice. Would you like me to get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby? You have a choice, yes or no? No, I can nurse them myself, or no, get one of them. But it was almost presuming like the sale's already made. You know, the baby, you pull them out of the water, that's it, and either you're going to nurse them yourself with one of the Egyptians or somebody you already have, or you want me to get one of the Hebrew women to do it. So it doesn't show us anywhere in the Bible that Miriam had sales training. But it appears she had read some sales books. You know, she was a very spiritual girl. Her parents had made this basket and they placed it in the river, trusting that God would look out for their baby. They trusted God, and that was a good thing. I want you to think about something else. This was the Nile. It's the same river that they're putting Moses in that basket and floating him across the top of it. The same exact water that the Pharaoh had commanded the Hebrew baby boys to be thrown into to die. You think about that. You see, Miriam's parents had trusted that God, they trusted in him fully. That was a good thing. Miriam went down to the river and watched to see what would happen to her baby brother. She expected something to happen. And she expected something to happen because she believed that God would do something. He would do something. I don't know if she knew exactly what would be done, but she wanted to watch. She was watching. That's a mark of a deeper spirituality. You know, there's a lot of people today who place things before God. They pray, and then they leave the matter in God's hands. They never bother to watch and see what God's going to do. When I was in sales, long before cell phones and such, we used index cards. And every time there was a potential customer, you wrote down their name, the date you called, maybe what product you talked about, whatever it was, and a time to call back in 1 week, put the date down. You go through your index cards, I got to call this guy today, got to call that guy today. There was an agenda, there was something going on. It's called following up. Anybody ever hear about following up? I called the doctor's office 3 times. The assistant says, doctor's not in. She's not sure if she can give me an earlier appointment. Why do you call back the next day anyway? You're following up. There's something you want, something you need. You're watching what's happening, what's going on. Some people, they pray, they leave the matter to God, and they never bother to watch and see what God will do. And you know, that's okay insofar as it goes, but they don't pray expectantly. They just put their basket in the river and hope for the best. Well, hope he doesn't drown. Okay. What time's the poker game? Miriam had a deeper spiritual walk because she went the extra step of watching and waiting for God to act. One of the things you notice is that this whole family are very dedicated to God. And I believe that was because Miriam and Aaron and Moses were children of godly parents. And they all showed a dedication and trust in God. And maybe not immediately, And maybe not through young rebellious years, but eventually it caught on and it transmitted from the parents to the children. And that's probably why in the book of Micah the prophet, God tells Israel through Micah in Micah 6 verse 4, I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, and also Aaron and Miriam. She's mentioned again. She is important, or God would not have mentioned her hundreds and hundreds of years later. Miriam and Moses and Aaron were godly kids from a godly home. Somebody bring me a Kleenex or napkin or something. And they grew up to have a deep spiritual strength that God wanted to use when leading his people out of Egypt. They were given that as children so they could use it later. Thanks. Miriam, though, this little girl, like her brothers, she would grow up to become the kind of person that God could entrust with great things. She was sent by God to help lead his people. Exodus 15:20 tells us that she was a prophetess. A prophet or prophetess was someone who heard from God and declared God's word to other people. Not everybody heard from him. We often think of a prophet would have been someone who predicted the future. That wasn't always the case. Sometimes they were merely preachers or darshanim, who told others what God wanted them to hear at that time, what God's message was. They didn't always just speak God's words. Sometimes prophets were people who led others in singing. A new covenant in Colossians 3:16, it tells us that this is one of the purposes of singing, is to teach others. When you sing and people listen and sing along and that song kind of gets in their memory, they've been taught something. It says in Colossians 3:16, let the word of Messiah dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to Adonai. God intends for us to use the songs we sing each week to teach and admonish us. The songs we sing aren't merely for our enjoyment. They allow us to reach other people and lift them up before God. I don't know how many times you've had this or whether you've ever experienced this. You hear a song in the service, and one day you're playing it at home, and a friend comes over, or a cousin comes to visit, and you're playing it, and you're singing it along, and they go, what's that? It's got a catchy tune. And you play it for them again, and they're listening to it, and you don't realize this. You think you're just sharing something with a good beat to it, when in reality, you're teaching them. You're getting them. You're opening a doorway where the Spirit of God gets into their heart and says, thank you to you. I'm going to bless you extra for this, but they now belong to me. That little sheep is mine now. I'm going to cover that sheep. I'm going to protect that sheep. I'm going to bless that sheep. I'm going to raise that sheep. When someone comes up to worship and they sing a song to glorify God, they're also lifting us all up before God, drawing us into his presence. That's the design of worship. And you're up there singing and you're feeling the moment in the alpha wave, that's all fake. What you're feeling is the tickle of the Holy Spirit, drawing you, touching you as you're singing praises to God. He's touching you. You're making that connection. Back in the late 70s, 80s, they had fax machines. And the fax machine, back then, you'd have to make a call, and then you listen for the tone. And it goes, and then you had the fax, and then you press the fax, and then the paper would go through and come out on the other end. They called that the fax handshake. The two machines had to trade electronic sounds and codes until they made a connection. When we worship, when we sing to God, when someone else leads us in worship, singing to God, it's like Moses and Miriam leading us in worship and praise to God. And that's when the Holy Spirit is out there looking for that handshake. And we sing and we connect with him. And we feel strength and blessing in our lives. Worship connects us with the Ruach, the Spirit. Singing to God draws us closer to him. It's a tale about a boy who had asked his father. He says, "Dad, what is the size of God?" And the father looked up at the sky and saw a plane, and he asked his son, "What is the size of that plane?" And the boy replied, "It's very, very small. I can hardly see it." And then the father took him to the airport, and they approached the plane, and he asks, "Now, my son, how big is the plane?" And the boy replied, "Wow, Dad, it's huge." And then the father told him, God's size depends on how close or far you are to him. The closer you are to him, the greater and greater he will be in your life.
Amen.
Now we look at archaic scriptures sometimes. We don't know what meaning they have for us. How many people decide to open their Bible and crack it open to the book of Chronicles? Not many. You want to read Genesis, you want to read Matthew, you want to read the Psalms, you want to read Proverbs. 1 Chronicles chapter 25 verse 1 tells us something. Thank you. It tells us, 1 Chronicles 25 verse 1, it talks about David and the commanders of the army set apart for avodah, for service, for worship, the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun, who prophesied with lyres, harps, and cymbals. Wait a minute, weren't they just playing instruments? It's not what it says. It says, who prophesied with lyres, harps, and cymbals. And like those prophets, Miriam led in singing. And who did Miriam lead in singing? Exodus 15:20. Then Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing. It appears that Miriam led the women in worship. From time to time, I speak with other rabbis about working on sermons one week. Maybe I'm having some difficulty with a verse or putting something together. Talk to some others, sometimes a conference call or something. And we talk about that week's portion, that week's scripture, and what we're thinking about doing. And we notice something unusual about this verse in Exodus 15. In verse 20, whose sister is Miriam said to be? Aaron's sister. And we puzzled over that for a little while. And then it occurred to me, what role did Aaron play in Israel? He was the high priest. It was his job to lead the people in worshiping God. By calling Miriam Aaron's sister in this verse, it might be that God was telling us that Aaron and Miriam worked together in ministering to the people's worship needs. You don't see Moses dancing with a tambourine. People say, okay, yeah, he was over 80. What do you want? But Miriam was older. So during the Exodus, it would appear that Moses led the people on their journey, Aaron led the people in their worship, and Miriam led the women in singing and dancing and praising God. And each of them had their specific and very important area of responsibility. But there came a day when Miriam wasn't happy with that arrangement. How many of us are blessed with giftings, and one day we're not happy with that arrangement? We become complacent. We become bored with our lives, with our congregations, with our rabbi, with our pastor, with a particular type of worship, liturgy, style. We become bored with it. It's like we're eating chocolate chip cookies every day and then we don't like them anymore. We want to change. God is unchanging. God says, I am the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He never changes. But how come we always want change? Want something new, something new. I had an old car, I want a new car. Hey, you know, it's this old joke about an Italian immigrant, and he comes to Brooklyn, New York, and he gets a job in this factory because his cousin gets him in. His cousin speaks English and Italian. The Italian guy says to his cousin, he says, can you help me out with lunch? I can't speak a word. So they go up to the counter, and he says to the guy, apple pie and coffee. The guy sits and eats apple pie and coffee. He says, listen, I'm here with you today, but I work like 2 factories over. I can't be here every day with you. They repeated it a few times. So about 2 weeks later, he goes to see his cousin. He says, look, I've been eating apple pie and coffee every day for the two weeks. Can you help me with something else? And so he says, just tell them you want corned beef sandwich. Can you say it? So we practiced, and he went up there and he said, corned beef sandwich. Held out the money, and she said, on white or rye? And he went, apple pie and coffee. Sometimes we have something very good, we appreciate it, and then we learn not to appreciate it anymore because we get tired of things easily, where God doesn't. But Miriam, there came a day when she wasn't happy with the arrangement she had. If you turn with me to Numbers chapter 12, in verse 1, Numbers chapter 12, it tells of an incident that occurred not more than a couple of years after they crossed the Red Sea, just before they come to the border of the Promised Land, and it says, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife, for he had married a Cushite. Notice Miriam's name comes first. It doesn't say Aaron and Miriam. It says Miriam and Aaron. Well, we can tell who wore the pants in that sibling relationship. Both she and Aaron are complaining about Moses' marriage to a Cushite. Some English Bibles translate that word as Ethiopian because Cushites were understood by some to have been Ethiopians. And both Aaron and Miriam complain, but Miriam's name comes first in the verse. And later in the chapter, she's the one who God punishes, not Aaron. In other words, she's the one who's really upset with Moses and his marriage with this Cushite woman. Now, a lot of the details in this chapter are left to our imagination. It doesn't tell us everything. But from the little we are told, some have come to believe that Moses' first wife had died, and he's taken this second woman, this Cushite, to be his bride. She's not an Israelite. She's different from the other Hebrew women. Now, whether Numbers 12 speaks of Zipporah or some other woman, in any case, the wife of Moses was not a Hebrew woman. Zipporah wasn't a Hebrew. She was the daughter of Yitro, the priest of Midian, or the sheikh of Midian. But either way, she wasn't a Hebrew woman. Miriam isn't happy about it. Perhaps she pointed to the day when Abraham refused to let Isaac marry from the Canaanites, or when Isaac complained about the possibility of his sons marrying Canaanites. Those Canaanite women weren't their kind of women. Now, Moses was a very godly man. He talked with God all the time, every day. Do you suppose he talked with God about who he was going to marry? Do you suppose that he may have? God had probably given his approval of the marriage, and Moses would have told Miriam as much. It's a possibility. And that's the only reason I could think of for Miriam and Aaron to protest. She says in Numbers 12 verse 2, very interesting thing. She says, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? In other words, how dare you play this God card and tell us God spoke to you and gave you his approval? We're prophets too, and he didn't say anything to us. Miriam was a very smart woman and deeply spiritual, but she suffered from self-righteousness and pride. She was a leader in Israel. She was Moses' big sister. She had a position that deserved to be respected, but Moses maybe isn't listening to her. After all, he talks with God all the time. face to face. Maybe she tried reasoning with him. Maybe she tried arguing with him. But Moses isn't going to change his mind. And the more she thinks about it, the madder she gets, until finally, I suspect, she challenged him. It says she began to speak against Moses. That's what the text says. Miriam began to speak against Moses. She began to speak, and God listened in, because right after that it said, and God heard it. And then God stepped in. If you look with me in Numbers 12, verses 4 to 10, we're told that God heard what Miriam said, and it says, at once Adonai said to Moses, Aaron and Miriam, come out to the tent of meeting, all three of you. And so the three of them came out. And then Adonai came down in a pillar of cloud, and he stood at the entrance to the tent and summoned Aaron and Miriam. And when both of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. When a prophet of Adonai is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. And with him I speak face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the form of Adonai. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The anger of Adonai burned against them, and then he left them. And when the cloud lifted above the tent, there stood Miriam, leprous, white as snow. And Aaron turned toward her and saw that she had leprosy. And biblical leprosy was a terrible disease that resulted in a person's body literally decaying before the sufferer's eyes. Parts of the body could fall off. They might raise their hand to say hi, and it gone. Safe to say the biblical lepers didn't make many wave offerings. One of the characteristics is when a person's skin turns white as like snow, and her sin was a public sin, and her punishment was a very public punishment. God did heal her because Moses asked him to. But verses 14 and 15 of Numbers 12, we're told that Adonai said to Moses this, confine her outside the camp for 7 days, and after that she can be brought back. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she was brought back. Miriam had apparently been very public in her criticism of Moses and his wife, and so the punishment was also very public. Everybody in the camp would know about Miriam and that she had overstepped her bounds. What does that teach us? What lesson do we learn? First, it teaches us that godly children reflect the godliness of their parents. Now, parents, take note. Miriam and her brothers became the kind of people they did because their parents trusted God and took their faith seriously. And so Miriam, Aaron, and Moses honored their parents in turn by taking their faith seriously. And because the kind of home they grew up in, Adonai eventually entrusted them with powerful ministries, each of them. Parents, remember this. And work to make your children successful in life by being sure that you do everything you can to make your faith real to your children. And the children in the room, not those who are laying to the side sleeping, but children in the room, take note. You honor your parents most when you live your lives to honor God. Amen. Second, it teaches us that God wants us to use our gifts for Him. Amen. You see people using their gifts for all kinds of things. People that are gifted speakers beyond compare. They're so gifted in their ministries that they buy a diamond ring so large that I don't even know if the carats can be calculated by a rabbit. They buy Rolls Royces and multi-million-dollar houses, mansions, and townhouses. Or they should be living humbly as a man of God should live. Get a regular car and regular house. Take all that extra money and give a fund. Feed people who are hungry. Help to heal people. I don't know how to heal them, Great. How much did that cost you? All that stuff together, $25 million? Stick that in a fund to pay for people that don't have the money but want to be educated to become doctors. How many doctors could you make with $25 million? With $100 million? How much money do you need? Well, I'm a man of God. Then act like it. Take off the diamond ring. Get out of the Rolls Royce. Leave the mansion. Sell it all. And give it to Messiah. Give it to his sheep. Give it to his people. It's what Messiah told the rich man. Sell everything you have. Give it to the poor. Then come and follow me. He couldn't do it. And Yeshua said, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for the rich man to get into heaven. And sometimes those who have money are humbled to the point where they don't, so that God can teach them. In the words of Solomon, the king of Israel, in Proverbs, Solomon teaches us an interesting thing. He asks God for favor. He says, do not give me too much that I should forget you, but do not give me too little that I should have to steal and profane your name. Just enough. You see, God is teaching us in this lesson of Miriam that Miriam should be singing because that is his gift to her. And she should be willing to be used by God with this gift. And because she was willing to be used by God, he entrusted her with leading other women to be closer to God. It teaches us that God expects us to treat his gifts and the positions of responsibilities he gives us as privileges, not rights. People on our own worship team sometimes becomes complacent. They're no longer with us in this shul, but they become complacent and begin criticizing what songs we're singing, how we're singing them, whatever. They begin to feel their own oats in a way. You shouldn't be doing that. You're here humbly. God is giving you hope, and I sing better than everybody else. That's a gift from God, not from you. Why are you patting yourself on the back? Do you really want laryngitis? Don't be shaking God's own gift back in his face. These gifts are privileges, not rights. They're given to us for God's purposes, not ours. Miriam had a position of responsibility. She had influence and respect, but she took her position and used it as a way to influence Moses to do things her way instead of God's way. Remember what she said. Is it true that Adonai has spoken only with Moses? Hasn't he also spoken with us? As we've just discovered, that didn't work out too well, did it? God wasn't going to tolerate that kind of power play. And part of the reason God wouldn't permit that is because that's not how things are supposed to work in God's kingdom. In the Besorah, the good news, we're told that at one point Yeshua had told his disciples in Mark chapter 10, he says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. I draw towards my close. What I want you to focus on in the story today about Miriam is that she was a godly woman. Amen. True, she stumbled and suffered a punishment for a harsh sin. But she remained a deeply spiritual woman. And that even after she had been corrected, God continued to use her for his own purposes. And I doubt she intended to do what she had done. She didn't set out to disobey God. But she did forget for a short period of time that she owed her gifts of prophecy and singing to God, and that they were precious commodities that come only from Adonai. God returned her to service. He did that because she really did love him. And she loved him so much that she had sang a song to glorify him, a song at the sea. And that's what every Messianic should have in their lives. A song that glorifies God. Even if we don't have a pretty voice, even if other people hear our voice and go, who stepped on a cat? But God made us, each one of us, and He made our voices.
Yes.
And isn't it true that everybody likes their own voice when they're singing in the shower?
Yes.
Right? I asked somebody, I said, you sing in the shower. Even if we don't have a pretty voice, we need to be a people who love to sing because we have a reason to sing. We have a reason to sing. In his book, Psalms of the Heart, George Sweeting illustrated a great truth from the experience of two Bible school graduates, John and Elaine Beekman. God called them to missionary work among the Chol Indians of southern Mexico. Sweeting reports that they rode mules and traveled by dugout canoes to reach this tribe. And they labored 25 years with other missionaries to translate the good news into the language of the Chol Indians. And today the Chol Assembly is thriving, more than 12,000 Chol Indians faith community, which is financially self-supporting. What's interesting is that when the missionaries came, the Chol Indians didn't know how to sing. With the coming of the good news, however, the believers in the tribe became known to other members of the tribe as the singers. Instead of calling the believers the Bible guys, whatever, they called them the singers. The Psalms teach us repeatedly to sing to Adonai. Sing to Adonai. Sing a new song. Sing praise to Him. And in Acts chapter 16, as I almost ready to close here, but I want to mention this. Acts 16, Paul and Silas were arrested and beaten with rods and thrown into jail. And verses 25 and 26 says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and other prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open, and everyone's chains came loose. Sing to God and thank Him as Moses and Miriam did. Sing in times of victory and in times of defeat. Sing in times of joy and sing in times of sadness. Amen. Sing to Adonai our Father. Sing to His Holy Spirit. Sing to His Son Yeshua. Sing! Shabbat Shalom.